As a representative of the graduate student and alumni scavenger hunt team of the University of Chicago, an organization of 25 to 40-year-old alcoholics who represent a very skewed demographic of the University of Chicago and planet Earth itself, I send out greetings on behalf of the people that we are, if you would call us that. If you caught our previous recording on the Voyager, you saw the best that humanity has to offer and a message for peace and friendship. If, after hearing this, you think we're far too annoying to be dealt with, we totally understand. Feel free to hit us up if you need help figuring out things about the galaxy or whatever. Also, if you're a stronger router than we do, we totally appreciate that. Cool.
Welcome to the first Lockheed-Hamantash debate under the new auspices.
Now, finally, after that long perambulation, we arrive at my argument, why the Latke is superior to the Hamantash from the perspective of human rights. Now, long introductions are entirely within the University of Chicago tradition, where knowledge grows from more to more to more, and faculty introductions are often longer than the invited speakers' talk. Now, in human rights, there is a major conflict between two schools of thought. One is human rights are universal. The other is that human rights are a Western construct that must adapt to local custom and tradition, i.e. cultural relativism. The principle of universalism holds that human rights are those rights one simply has by virtue of being a human being. And cultural relativism holds that some customs, practices, and actions are exempt from criticism by outsiders. The UDHR states, quote, every individual and every organ of society, I'm not sure what that means, shall strive to promote respect for these rights and freedoms and by progressive measures to secure their universal and effective recognition and observance. Well, what does this have to do with Hamantashans and Latkes? The universal right to food derives from Article 25 of the UDHR, that everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for one's health and well-being, including food and medical care. Footnote, we need a trauma center on the South Side. So we know that every human being has the right to adequate food. That is universal. The Hamantash is the ultimate cultural relativist food. It is made of ingredients that were all present in ancient Israel, flour, eggs, poppy seeds, and demonstrates those parts of our tradition that are unchanging. No one but a Jew, burdened down by generations of tradition, would eat the damn things. We Jews do follow some other traditions very faithfully. For example, why has male circumcision lasted so long? Our friend by the bookstore asks us every day. Well, there was that covenant between God and Abraham, but the real deal, if you goyim really want to know, is that every Jewish father wants his son's dick to look like his. Now that is a fundamental motivation for the maintenance of a culturally relativistic tradition. But dough triangles full of poppy seeds? You've got to be kidding. It's clearly a custom exempt from legitimate criticism by outsiders. Now, a last warning to you Hamantash promoters. Eating the poppy seed variety can cause you to fail the drug test for that State Department job that David Axelrod has just lined up for you. The Latke can have it both ways, both universal and culturally relative. The Latke symbolizes the adaptability and openness to change of Jewish tradition. We are the definitive cosmopolitans. And yes, the potato was entirely unknown to the Maccabees or to anyone within 10,000 miles of the temple. It was centuries, almost 2 millennia in fact, before Yids and Spuds crossed paths. First human rights principle, consumption of potatoes is universal. We eat them simply because we are human beings. According to Wikipedia, don't tell my students I'm quoting Wikipedia, the annual diet of an average global citizen in the first decade of the 21st century includes 73 pounds of potatoes per year. However, we must be sensitive to cultural specificity and local customs, even with respect to the potato in its raw form, which is way more diverse than you might think. Now, once we get to cooked potatoes, we see that there's a tremendous cultural diversity. So while the love of the potato is universal, its preparation around the world is culturally specific, thus satisfying both lawyers and anthropologists. You can cheer for your favorite. Now, we could go off on a tangent here about McDonald's Western imperialist imposition of supposedly universal values, but let's admit they have developed the perfect French fry and leave it at that. Back to the humble latke itself. How did the potato get to Poland? How did the Jews get to Poland? These are unanswerable and difficult questions, so let's skip them. And turn to the story of the true guardians of Jewish culture, strong Jewish women. We are willing to get arrested to pray at the wall. And we are culturally adaptable where necessary. Now, this is actually a picture of my great-grandmother, who was a seamstress in Kiev. For some reason, she is wearing a female Cossack costume of her own design. Was this for Purim? I'm not sure. Was it an ad? Well, we're now going to end our culturally specific and universally accepted, artery-clogging, delicious discs of fried potatoes, onions, and eggs. In the Parav edition with applesauce for those of you who keep kosher and want them to complement your grandmother's dried-up brisket. And for those of you who are fancy schmancy and want them with sour cream and caviar, sei Gesundheit, you should live and be well, and eat latkes. Thank you.
We don't have a sports management program. What we have both in the economics department, which I teach, and then the business school, it's really, I might call it generally the economics of sports, but it really is more than anything else using basic economics and basic statistics to try to analyze sports. How do I model sports in terms of competition on the field or on the ice, and sort of personnel decisions, just a lot of strategic decision making, and I'll talk about some of that tonight.
One of our most esteemed annual traditions involves thinking about and even debating the aims of liberal education. Each fall, in the week before classes resume and the new academic year is upon us with full force, we invite a senior faculty member to address the entering first-year class and transfer students assembled in Rockefeller Chapel with his or her thoughts about liberal education and its meaning and value to our lives. That's
You'll be happy to know that I'll be talking not about my own tragedy, but other people's tragedy. It's a lot easier to be lighthearted about other people's tragedy than your own, and I want to keep in the spirit of the conference. So if you believe the media accounts, being a drug dealer in the height of the crack cocaine epidemic was a very glamorous life, in the words of Virginia Pastrell. There was money, there was drugs, guns, women, you name it, jewelry, bling bling, it had it all, okay? What I'm here to tell you today is that, in fact, based on 10 years of research, a unique opportunity to go inside a gang, to see the actual books, the financial records of the gang, that the answer turns out not to be that being in the gang was a glamorous life, But I think more realistically, that being a gang, selling drugs for a gang, is perhaps the worst job in all of America. And that's what I'd like to convince you of today. Okay, so there are three things I want to do. First, I want to explain how and why crack cocaine had such a profound influence on inner city gangs. Secondly, I want to tell you how somebody like me came to be able to see the inner workings of a gang. It's an interesting story, I think. And then third, I want to tell you in a very superficial way about some of the things we found when we actually got to look at the financial records, the books of the gang. Okay, so before I do that, just one warning, which is that this presentation has been rated R by the Motion Picture Association of America. It contains adult themes, adult language. Given who's up on the stage, you'll be delighted to know that, in fact, there'll be no nudity, barring a unexpected wardrobe malfunctions aside. Okay. So let me start by talking about crack cocaine and how it transformed the gang. Okay, and to do that, you have to actually go back to a time before crack cocaine in the early 80s and look at it from the perspective of a gang leader. Okay, so being a gang leader in the inner city wasn't such a bad deal in the mid-'80s, the early 80s, let me say. Now, you had a lot of power, you got to beat people up, you got a lot of prestige, a lot of respect. But the thing is, there was no money in it. Okay? The gang had no way to make money. You couldn't charge dues to the people in the gang because the people in the gang didn't have any money. You couldn't really make any money selling marijuana. Marijuana's too cheap, it turns out. There's just no market for being. You can't get rich selling marijuana. You couldn't sell cocaine. Cocaine's a great product, powder cocaine, but you got to know rich white people. And most of the inner city gang members didn't know any rich white people. They couldn't sell to that market. You couldn't really do petty crime either. It turns out petty crime's a terrible way to make a living. So as a result, as a gang leader, you had, power. It's a pretty good life. But the thing was, in the end, you were living at home with your mother. And so it wasn't really a career. There was something that, there were limits to how powerful and important you could be if you had to live at home with your mother. Okay. Then along comes crack cocaine. Okay? And in the words of Malcolm Gladwell, crack cocaine was the extra chunky version of tomato sauce for the inner city. Okay? Because crack cocaine was an unbelievable innovation. I don't have time to talk about it today. But if you think about it, I would say that in the last 25 years, of every invention or innovation that's occurred in this country, the biggest one in terms of impact on the well-being of people who live in the inner city was crack cocaine. Okay? It's for the worse, not for the better, but for the worse. It had a huge impact on life. So what was it about crack cocaine? It was a brilliant way of getting the brain high. Okay? Because you could smoke crack cocaine, and you can smoke crack cocaine, you can't smoke powder cocaine. And smoking is a much more efficient mechanism of delivering a high than it is snorting it. And it turned out there was this audience that didn't know it wanted crack cocaine, but when it came, it really did. And it was a perfect drug you could buy the cocaine that went in for $1, sell it for $5, highly addictive. The high was very short. So for 15 minutes, you get this great high. And then when you come down, all you want to do is get high again. Okay? It created a wonderful market. And for the people who were there running the gang, it was a great way, seemingly, to make a lot of money, at least for the people on the top. Okay, so this is where we enter the picture. Not really me. I'm really a bit player in all this. My co-author, Sudhir Venkatesh, is the main character. Okay, so he was a math major in college who had a good heart and decided he wanted to get a sociology PhD, came to the University of Chicago. So the 3 months before he came to Chicago, he had spent following the Grateful Dead. And in his own words, he looked like a freak. Okay? He's a South Asian, very dark-skinned South Asian, big man, and he had hair, in his words, down to his ass. Okay? Defied all kinds of boundaries. Was he black or white? Was he man or woman? It was really a curious sight to be seen. So he showed up at the University of Chicago, and the famous sociologist William Julius Wilson was doing a book that involved surveying people all across Chicago. And he took one look at Sudhir, who was going to go do some surveys for him, and decided he knew exactly the place to send him, which was to one of the toughest, most notorious housing projects, not just in Chicago, but in the entire United States. So Sudhir, the suburban boy who'd never really been in the inner city, dutifully took his clipboard and walked down to this housing project, gets to the first building. The first building? Well, there's nobody there. But he hears some voices up in the stairwell. So he climbs up the stairwell, and he comes around the corner and finds a group of young African-American men playing dice. Okay. This is about 1990, peak of the crack epidemic. This is a very dangerous job, being in a gang. You don't like to be surprised. You don't like to be surprised by people coming around the corner. And the mantra was, shoot first, ask questions later. Okay? Now, Sadir was lucky. He was such a freak. And that clipboard probably saved his life, because he figured no other rival gang member would be coming up to shoot at them with a clipboard. So his greeting was not particularly warm. But they did say, well, OK, let's hear your questions on your survey. So I kid you not, the first question on the survey that he was sent to ask was, how do you feel about being born black in America? Makes you wonder about academics, okay? Well, so the choices of answers were very good, bad, and very bad. What Sadir found out is, in fact, that the real answer was the following. The survey was not, in the end, going to be what got Sadir off the hook. He was held hostage overnight in the stairwell. There was a lot of gunfire. There were a lot of philosophical discussions he had with the gang members. By morning, the gang leader arrived, checked out Sadir, decided he was no threat, and they'd let him go home. So Sadir went home, took a shower, took a nap. And you and I, probably faced with a situation, would think, well, I guess I'm going to write my dissertation on the Grateful Dead. I've been following for the last 3 months. Sadir, on the other hand, got right back, walked down to the housing project, went up to the floor, the second floor, and said, hey guys, I had so much fun hanging out with you last night. I wonder if I could do it again tonight. And that was the beginning of what turned out to be a beautiful relationship that involved Sadir living in the housing project on and off for 10 years, hanging out in crack houses, going to jail with the gang members.
The general title accorded to these talks is adapted from Alfred North Whitehead's famous lecture on the aims of education given in 1912 to the education section of the International Congress of Mathematicians in Cambridge, England. The annual Ames lecture at Chicago began as a student initiative in the early 1960s, and over the decades it has become a sturdy and even venerable part of our common and shared history.
And it goes on like this.